Namaste, my friend. Welcome to Bhakti Yoga Conference, Grace in an Age of Distraction, hosted here at Harvard Divinity School. My name's Happy Jack, the founder of Happy Jack Yoga University and a Master of Divinity student here at Harvard. Really, the purpose of this session today and the overall conference is to bring together prominent voices, people who have been living Bhakti Yoga, who've been living it, practicing it, sharing it for many years, and hopefully give us some ideas, some insight, some inspiration on our spiritual path. As of now, we got over 3,500 registrants. Thank you so much for being a part of this historical event at Harvard. If you'd like to join us, or if you have questions, share them in the chat, raise your virtual hand. Our speaker today would love to hear from you. I'm going to take a moment here and spotlight our speaker while I say a few words. Please meet Anuttama Das. He is the Minister of Communications for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He's also served as a member of ISKCON's Governing Body Commission, the GBC, since 1999 and was its chairman in 2014-2015. Anuttama Das was initiated into the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in 1976 in Vrindavan, India. Very holy place. He currently oversees ISKCON temples in the Northeast United States, including Boston, and is a member of the executive board for ISKCON's international headquarters in Mayapur, West Bengal, India. As Minister of Communications, Dasa oversees ISKCON's online news magazine, ISKCON News, and the Society's academic publication, ISKCON Communications Journal, as well as directing ISKCON's media, government relations, and religious freedom initiatives. Das is the executive producer of several films, including the award-winning Joy of Devotion. Many of our yoga community have seen that documentary. It's part of our yoga teacher training, so we always enjoy that. Beautiful. He has been interviewed on Dateline, Fox News, BBC, Larry King Live, Peacock Productions, and a host of other media outlets. Das served twice as vice president of the Religion Communicators Council, a New York-based interfaith organization, and serves on the board of Religions for Peace USA, and as trustee of the Bhaktivedanta College in Belgium. He's the convener of the annual Vaishnava Christian Dialogue in the US and in India, and the Vaishnava Muslim Dialogue in the US. Anuttama Das and his wife Rukmini, who we all got to meet, lives in Rockville, Maryland, in the US, near their son Gauravani, daughter-in-law Vrinda, and 3 grandchildren. And just, for myself, just got to say, I had the privilege of meeting Anuttama Prabhu through his wife, Rukmini, who has been a beloved contributor to this conference. I look to her as a Shiksha guru. She's really been a mentor and an instructing teacher on my spiritual path. And thank you to Rukmini and yourself. We got to meet at the Vaishnava Christian Dialogue last year. And it was just so refreshing to see Christians and practitioners of Bhakti Yoga really coming together in dialogue, seeking common ground. How can we work together? How can we understand each other and appreciate each other? And I don't see that as much in the outside world. So it was so refreshing. Also last fall, I joined a retreat that you hosted. It was called the Mantra Retreat. It was hosted at New Vrindavan, and actually many of our community are going to be coming with us to New Vrindavan in June. We've got a retreat there ourselves, and it's really excited for this session because we just had a session with Sita Devi Dasi about women empowerment. And what was really beautiful, the retreat that you hosted called Mantra was actually a men's empowerment, so that how can we become better men? How can we be the best versions of ourselves, including for the women in our lives? You've been a huge supporter of this conference, helping spread the word through ISKCON News and various spiritual communities in the USA. I would venture to say of the 3,500, over 1,000 of those are somewhat indirect result of Anuttama Prabhu and his help to spread the word. Prabhu, we're grateful for your association. The title today is, Could the Universe Be This Good? The Metaphysics of Bhakti. My friends, if you're ready to get started with our speaker, throw your arms in the air and loudly chant Haribol! Welcome, Anuttama Prabhu.
Thank you, Jack. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks for that gracious introduction. And I just want to take a moment and just the title of your this ongoing webinar podcast series, "Grace in the Age of Distraction," is so good
Mhm.
because it is an age not only of distraction. I mean, it kind of makes me think of whatever that rock song, that this is the age of destruction. And we see that going on so many places. It's an age of distraction and destruction, and we all need grace. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that, Grace. And for those of you that haven't thought about it much, I was just reminded Jack's actually put together 50 of these interviews, and he's doing this while he's continuing his studies at Harvard and running a yoga studio and doing all kinds of other things like that. So how he's finding time to do that, I think that is the proof that there's a lot of grace in Jack's camp right now. So thanks for putting this together and really appreciate that a whole lot.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I feel, as I was saying to you before, like truly, before we went on air, I was saying this is the most demanding time of my life. Like I owe a paper on the Bhagavad Gita to Professor Clooney, a dear friend of yours. I don't know where I'm going to find the time for it, but being a part of this project, being able to be in association with devotees like yourself, it's the most nourishing, fulfilling project I've ever been a part of. So that the papers, the Sanskrit translations, we'll figure it out. We'll get that done. But right now, we've got your time together for an hour, and
Just quickly, comment the Bhagavad Gita, as we know, it's all about studying how the warrior Arjuna was instructed to make his life one of grace, even in the midst of a very difficult situation. So maybe I don't know the particular confines or construction of your paper, what the requirements are, but maybe you should talk about in part this project you put together, which is how do you bring bhakti into actually being a student and all the pressures that you've undergone and how that in itself really is kind of applying bhakti and the teachings of Bhagavad Gita in the modern age. So maybe bring that into your paper and make it very real.
thank you for that idea. I'm absolutely going to do that. And I'll share this video with Professor Clooney. He's watching, many of these presentations. And so he'll know that, hey, Anuttama Prabhu gave permission. So this is why it's coming in this way.
And I'll get credit if he gives you an A on it, and I won't take credit if he gives you something less than that. Okay, as long as we have a one-sided arrangement on it, it's okay with me.
That sounds perfect. I'm all good with that. Well, again, thank you for your time today. What we found really helpful, before we get into this beautiful topic that you've come up with, is to get to know our speakers, get to know, who it is that's spending this time with us. We heard a little bit, 1976, you took initiation in the holy Dham of Vrindavan with Prabhupada. But would you share with us, really what brought you to your spiritual path? What brought you to bhakti?
Yeah, I think the short answer is grace. I'll give a longer answer, but I think the answer is grace. Um, it's in it, I mean, my story, the thing that's interesting about anybody's personal spiritual story, I feel, is to see how they're so different and how different experiences in life brings people eventually to really question why we're here and what's the purpose of life. So, I mean, my story, it's interesting in some ways, hopefully interesting. My family was not a religious family. I went to a Protestant church camp for 12 years for a month every summer, but only because they had great water sports and archery. And my mother found the camp and I started going. There was no religious intention, although that was an hour of each day and there was church every Sunday. That was pretty much the extent of my religious exposure until I went to college. This was in 1972, way back. At that time, there was a lot of social upheaval, a lot of young people questioning why is the world such a mess? Why? I grew up in Detroit, 1968, the race riots. A whole section of the town was burned down by very angry, frustrated people because of an exploitative system. Um, Vietnam War was raging. A lot of my particular age was right at the cusp, so I had a draft number, but they did not draft anybody my year. The very next year, they didn't give people draft numbers. I got a number, but they didn't call anybody up. So a lot of friends of mine that were a little older, a lot of people have been killed. A lot of young American men have been killed. A lot of protesting against the war. Interesting to see 20, 30 years later, the Secretary of Defense, a guy named McNamara, publicly said Vietnam was a big mistake. We shouldn't have gone there. It's like, well, thank you for apologizing, but what about the 58,000 young Americans that died? What to speak of hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese that died? So there's a lot of questioning about what's going on in the world. Why is there so many problems? So that kind of led me to get into a study of political science and political theory because I had this idea, how can we organize society in such a way that's more equitable and that's better for everybody? And first couple of years, we studied all the great political theorists going back to Aristotle and Plato and under modern philosophies up to Marx and Hobbes and Locke and all that, Machiavelli and, the whole range. And my experience was after some time, a few semesters, I remember I had a favorite professor, his name was Zimmerman. And I approached him and I said, we're young undergraduates. I'm 19 at the time, and you're asking me to write a 40-page paper critiquing Karl Marx, read 600 pages of his works. But, who am I as an undergraduate to be critiquing these people? But the thing I've noticed that all of them, they start with their assumptions. Marx starts with an assumption that human experience is one of class struggle and class warfare. That's his assumption. And Locke, who's the founder of a lot of the Western kind of ideas, he had the sense that no, we're just kind of wandering around as individuals in the forest. So we enter into a social contract so we don't exploit it. So they all had the different assumptions. Machiavelli, it's all about just get ahead by hook or by crook. Kill your way to the top. So I asked my professor, I said, shouldn't we be understanding the truth or the validity of their assumptions? Because as soon as we establish if some set of those are truthful, then I'm ready to follow that for the rest of my life. I'm looking for something that makes sense. And his answer to me was that we're not here to study truth. At which point I don't think I expressed it, but I was thinking, well, why am I paying you thousands of dollars a year if you can't even demonstrate to me what I'm learning is true in that sense and applicable, that actually is going to make a difference in my life? So that and a few other experiences as an undergraduate, I think as most young people, my hormones were fully blossoming and my desires for materialistic life were in full. So I tried to enjoy myself, as they say, to the fullest. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was a term in that age era. And it was very frustrating. It was just a very, very frustrating materialistic experience. So the fact that nobody could help me, my experience, nobody could actually explain why things were the way they were, why there was so much suffering in the world, how should we design a system that works, mixed in with the fact that I could see that all of the things that I had been promised were going to make me happy didn't really make me happy. The people I knew that had more money weren't very necessarily more happy, etc. So that caused me at a certain point in time, I dropped out of college. I actually switched to another school. I was at Michigan State. I switched to University of Michigan. I started studying a lot of philosophy, which led to like religion. I started hanging around with Jesus freaks and going to Buddhist seminars. I started walking across town to go to the Hare Krishna temple because I had some sense there has to be some higher answer for all these things. And that just kind of led me to be convinced there is definitely some higher reality. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to find it, but I need to. It's the thing that really is the most important thing to do in life. And so at a certain point in time, various things led to one another. The Buddhist retreats and the Hare Krishnas and the Jesus freaks all seem to make a lot of sense, more sense than anything I'd been studying in political science or anything else, economics for sure, anything else in university. So then I totally quit school and I traveled around the United States for a couple months and also realized at some point along the way that I was as much a part of the problem as I was a part of the solution. And then I really needed to work on myself as well. And I remember being with my last roommate in college, standing outside a bar in an alley, telling him that I don't know what it is. I don't know where it is. I don't know who it is, but I know there's a higher reality and I've got to find it. And I remember he didn't relate too much, but he just said, then you got to go for it. You
Mm.
just got to go for it. So then I completely quit school. I quit my job. I left my girlfriend. I left my friends. I left everything and I traveled and eventually got to Colorado. Long story short, I ended up going to Colorado and moved into a Hare Krishna temple to try it out for a week. And
A week.
the night I moved in, yeah, I tried for a week. The night I moved in, I made a promise to myself. I said, I don't know if this is actually the right path. I don't know if this is actually going to connect me with God. I don't know who you are, Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, Krishna, Rama, so many different names of the divinity. But please understand, I'm trying as best I can to make a sincere effort to find you. And I made a promise to myself, if this is not it, I'm going to leave for sure. But also, I'm not going to leave and go back to what I left. I'm not going back. I'm only going forward in spiritual life. So that was now almost 50 years ago. And that's kind of brought me, that's an in short encapsulation of what really brought me around to being a Christian devotee. I'll mention one other thing. When I was an undergraduate student, I get very involved with student politics. There was before the era of, rate your professor online and all those kind of things. They had some kind of university itself took student surveys of measuring professors' performance. So I was a student representative in the university congress or whatever they called it. And as students, we found out the university had this information, how good the professors were, quote unquote, because they used that for tenure rankings. We didn't have access to it. We said, why not? We want access. And they said, you can't have it. We spent a whole year fighting this political battle to get access to see those documents. At the end of the year, although there was only 30 students and a couple hundred adults, professors, and all that, we convinced enough people that yes, we should get access to those. So we won on the last day, the last meeting, and the president of the university, a fellow named Clifton Wharton Jr., who went on to become the education secretary in Clinton's presidency, uh, William Clinton, um, way back when. He stood up and said, well, I'll take this under consideration. Thank you very much. And I'm going to send it to the College of the Deans, which meant 30 people that had no student representation, none at all. We knew basically he killed it. And
Mm.
he basically, frankly, cheated us on the whole thing. Nobody told us ahead of time that was. So I mentioned that just because I sat there with some of my friends and I learned if there's this much cheating that goes on and something as unimportant as students reviewing their professors, what must be happening in places like Washington, D.C., or various political environments? What type of cheating and misuse of power must be happening. So that kind of shut the door for me. I maybe considered pre-law politics, and that closed the door very quickly. And that, like, okay, I don't want to go down that avenue.
Wow.
So many avenues, so many doors closed. I worked as a bartender for some time, watched so many people every week come and use the same lines on a different woman in front of the bar and go home and come back the next week unhappy, frustrated, use the same lines. I just realized this what a meaningless path this is. So all those kind of things just kind of piled up and I ended up where I am.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing kind of so openly and vulnerably. And I want to quickly turn it over to the topic of today. But if I just ask one question, because you said, "Hey, I'm going to go stay at this Hare Krishna temple for a week," but yet 50 years later, here you are, still a part of it. What was it? What did you hear? What did you see? What did you learn that made you stay there versus going back to the Christian community, the Buddhist community, all of the other beautiful traditions?
I think in a sense it was more what I didn't see or hear or feel. My personal experiences, every other tradition, and I experimented with it. That I tried to give myself to. I reached certain questions or reached what I felt were kind of barriers, um, philosophical contradictions that I felt kind of took me to a certain point, but they didn't go further. And as within the Vaishnava practice, my experience has been the questions that I have that may not all be answered immediately were there was an opportunity to ask all those questions. There was an opportunity, at least it was explored. And as time has gone by, I've seen a lot of those questions answered. So, whereas let's say when I was hanging out with my Jesus freak friends and my Buddhist friends and all that, I remember asking Jesus freaks, which was a term in those days of it was a lot kind of a wave of young Christian advocates, young people. Um, what's your concept of Buddha? And it was basically, well, he's bad because he doesn't accept Jesus, who's the way, the truth, and the life. And I thought, well, I don't think that's necessarily it. So close the door on those folks. Um, I mean, I'm simplifying things a little bit here. And in a similar way, speaking with my Buddhist friends, well, what about Jesus? Well, he was an enlightened person. Well, I think there's more to it than that. And when I came into the Vaishnava process, Jesus suddenly made sense and fit into the bigger picture, and Buddha made sense. And materialism, why people are so materialistic, made sense. And why there's so much suffering in the world, there was an understanding of that that was theoretical, but also logical and also experientially true. And that just made the world a difference to me.
Nice. It's obviously it clicked, and here you are all these years later. It's beautiful. Well, I want to make time for you've got something planned to share with us, and I know we've got questions because it's so intriguing, the topic. Could the universe be this good? The metaphysics of bhakti. Please share more. It certainly piqued my attention.
Yeah, I chose that topic because when I was understanding, I didn't know you were going to have 50 speakers, but I knew you were going to have a lot. And I saw, some of the people are professors and great scholars of the Bhakti tradition and the Vaishnava tradition. So I thought, okay, what's something that maybe would be a little unique? And I think this is a big question. I mean, I live in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to get into the politics of the whole thing, but I think at least in our part of the country and maybe in a lot of the whole world today, people are really asking, why are things getting so crazy? Why is there so much polarization? Why is there so much tension in the world? Why is there so much hatred that we kind of thought was going to disappear or did to some extent be minimized in the past? I'm going to mention one thing, just going back a little bit of my story. Growing up in Detroit, the primary conflict was black white. That's what you just grew up with. There was tension between these two social bodies, racist ethnicities. As a young person in college, I traveled to the West. We were trying to get to the Grand Canyon to go backpacking. It didn't work out. But anyway, found myself some store and there was a Native American person walked in. It was obviously of that ethnicity. And I was like, wow, cool, a Native American person. This is wow, great. I've seen you on television and never met a person from your background. But I picked up immediately amongst the ethnically white people there was some tension. I immediately picked it up in the room. And I realized, wait a minute, out here there's white-red tension. Where I'm from, there's black-white tension. You go in other parts of the world, there's what is this? This is crazy. I'm thinking this person is something almost exalted because he's a unique coming from a unique group of people that I haven't interacted with. I can learn from him, and he's got so many wonderful things that he and his history of his people have contributed. But these other folks are upset about that. They're uptight about that. They have stereotypes about that, and it just made no sense. So that was one of the things that kind of spurred me on to really feel like there's a need of a spiritual solution, of a spiritual perspective on these kind of things. So anyway, the thing with metaphysics, I thought it'd be interesting, and just this morning I just picked up. You got a lot of Harvard folks here, so they throw around words like metaphysics all the time, but not everybody does. Um, Merriam-Webster Dictionary: the nature and origin of reality itself, the immortal soul, and the existence of a supreme being. The branch of philosophy that explores the fundamental nature of reality, existence, and the universe, delving into questions beyond the scope of everyday experience and science, looking at spirituality in terms of referring to the non-physical, immaterial aspect of existence, encompassing concepts like the soul, consciousness, or higher power. So I was kind of thinking from my mind again. I I dropped out of college. I have no degrees, so I'm not a trained scholar, but just my observation. There's kind of four primary views, metaphysical views, concepts of reality. One is there's no reason for anything. There's no explanation. Maybe there was a big bang or something like that. It's all a material cause. This is the only life. Go for it. Enjoy everything that you can while you're here. Some people interpret that to you should be more of a humanitarian in terms of, helping others. Some people it's just gross materialism, just unrestrained and everything in between. But basically, there's no explanation, and just enjoy life as best you can while you're here through your bodily senses, your mind, your vacation home, your power boat, all of those kind of things. Then there's another group of people, of ideas that no, actually, there's a creator behind everything. There's a God who's brought everything together. And how much authority he has, is it checked by a devil-like personality or not? Is he good? Is he bad? Or is he or is he a she? Those kind of things is a bit of a kind of a, perspective on that, varying perspectives on that. But it leaves a question of, well, if there is a God, why is there suffering? The old age-old question of theodicy, which I think thoughtful people you have to struggle with. If there is a God and if God is good, why so much suffering? Why is there suffering in the world? And I mentioned earlier, I went as a camper and then became a counselor at a church camp. I remember standing on the beach of Camp Westminster, shaking my fist at the universe and saying, God, if you're out there, get out of my life. I don't want anything to do with you because whatever you created stinks. There is too much suffering. There's too much racism. There's too much sexism. There's too much abuse. There's too much, material experiences that lead one to misery. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I became an atheist for a while. I kind of went from a nothing to an atheist, eventually to trying to be a devotee of God. So I found there's shortcomings there. If there's a God without any explanation of why there's suffering, and then there's a school of thought, that the world really it's just a big illusion. Um, Before I left on my trip to go west, I was reading someone named Alan Watt or Watts, perhaps, who had a really hip radio show in Detroit. Uh, and he was into some type of Buddhism or something. And I remember reading one of his books called, I think it was The Red and the Black, or The Red and the White or something, about how actually we're all God and we've just forgotten. And we just have to come out of this misunderstanding, which is akin to like a lot of philosophies. So in Michigan, when you played hide and go seek as a kid, if at a certain point in time and you said, okay, game's up, I don't know where it comes from, but there was an expression, alley, alley, home free. Maybe there's some Midwesterners here today that are familiar with that expression. I've told others and they're like, what? I never heard of that type of game, but that's what we did. Alley, alley, home free means I can't find anybody or I found as many as I can. Come on, everybody come back. So this is going to sound really stupid, but I took this book as maybe this is the truth. Let me try it. Everything else, it was like, hey, drugs will make you happy. Okay, let me try it. Didn't work. Hey, drinking will make you happy. Didn't work. Politics will make you happy. Didn't work. Okay, maybe I got to realize I'm the universe. I'm God. And I sat down in a chair in as deep and as sincere a meditation as I possibly could call up within my soul. Alley, alley, home free. Alley, alley, home free. I'm done with this game. If I'm God and it's just a big game and I'm playing in some kind of illusion, I'm tired of this game. This game is not working out. Let's stop. I'm stopping. I'm in control. I'm going to start a new game because I don't like this game. And it didn't work. I opened my eyes. There was still suffering. There was still pain in the world. I was still there. And okay, so much for that philosophy. And then, so this kind of leads me to this why I think Vaishnavism offers. I was speaking, you mentioned my wife Rukmini earlier. She and I were speaking, I think in an interview with Edwin Bryant you had the other day. He mentioned a writing from Jiva Goswami that said, if you don't have doubts, then you're a fanatic. So the idea of the gradual evolution and awakening of our spirituality. So the idea presented in Vaishnavism, as I understand it, is just so positive. It's just that it's such an endearing concept that first of all, there is a supreme reality, which is a person. Okay, maybe that's good or bad, but just let's say there's a supreme reality, which is a person, but that person is the most beautiful person, the most knowledgeable person, the all-powerful person, which maybe that's not so good, but let's explore more. The most enchanting person. Just we're talking about a theory now, a construct, a metaphysical concept, that the ultimate reality is a person, and that person is full of all attractive. The name Krishna, which is a beautiful name, means all attractive person. So that's, wow, that's interesting. Okay, supreme reality is a person and they're all attractive. Wow, okay, interesting. Okay, second concept. I'm eternal. I don't die. I just had my 70th birthday. It's getting pretty close. Um, I don't die. I live forever. Why I'm here, that's a different question. But for now, just the concept, there's no death. There's really no old age. We don't suffer from old age. The body does, but not me. There is no death and ultimately no rebirth. Um, that actually, so okay, so the divinity is there, supreme, attractive. I'm eternal. Third idea, I have a relationship. I actually have a relationship with this unlimitedly attractive, beautiful, loving reality. And not only that, I count. We live in a world, the Surgeon General has said, the head of the British Medical Department, whatever it's called there, there's an epidemic of loneliness in the world. They've used that term, an epidemic. Where is that coming from? Because we're all looking. When I was young, there was a very popular music group called the Moody Blues.
Mhm.
They had one song, We're All Looking for Someone. And it so much resonated for me because I'm looking around the world and I can see everybody's looking for someone and I'm looking for someone. And oftentimes we get hurt in those endeavors to build those relationships. But the idea that actually there is a divinity, I have a relationship with that divinity, that's where my loneliness, where my need for interpersonal reactions can be satisfied. It's like, again, as a theory, wow, that's pretty interesting. The Ishopanishad describes not only do I have a relationship, but that divine energy, that divine personality actually is with me in every moment throughout history, throughout my whole this life and previous lives and future lives, if there are, who's sitting with me like two birds in a tree, watching what I'm doing, waiting for me to turn towards him. In that sense, him and her both there. It's another conversation. You probably talked about Rod and Krishna in some of your conversations. I'll just say he for now for short. And that divinity has so much affection for me. They sit here with me, everything. I can, like, I'm standing on the beach, God, get out of my life. He's like, okay, I heard you. I'm still here. I can do terrible things, bad things to myself, towards the world. Christian doesn't like those things, but he never gives up on us. Some of the other religious ideologies or practices that I studied had the idea that at a certain point in time, you don't accept God, you cross the line, maybe it's the end of this life, you're forever punished. That's not there in Vaishnavism. There is karma, there is reaction, but not ever from the point of you're completely punished and cut off and there's no redemption at all. That's not a Vaishnava concept. So there's a supreme reality. It's a person. I'm eternal. I have a relationship with that person. Yeah, but still, there's so much suffering in the world. Okay, suffering, suffering. Why suffering? The Vaishnava philosophy teaches two reasons. One, I am trying to enjoy myself as an individual spiritual being that has free will, separate from the divinity. So I've chosen to separate myself from the all attractive person. It's kind of like your mom telling you, we'll come to dinner. No, I don't want to come to dinner, but I'm hungry. We'll come to dinner. No, I don't want to come to dinner, but I'm hungry. It's like, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with God, who's the all attractive person. Um, but why am I unhappy? Well, I've chosen to separate myself from the all attractive source of pleasure, Rama, Krishna, the all attractive. So I'm responsible for this. So there's suffering, one, because I've chosen to separate myself. And secondly, because it's to remind us, just like, you stub your toe and you realize, oh gosh, I don't want to minimize human suffering. There's some suffering that's difficult to comprehend. But in general, we've all experienced, you get a bad grade as a student, and it's like, okay, I got to work hard next time. You stub your toe and you realize I need to be more careful what I do. You eat too much and you get sick, you realize not to eat too much. So this general concept that suffering, ultimately, Vaishnava perspective, it has a purpose, which is to help us realize what we really should be doing in life, what we should really be seeking. And that the whole world, Bhagavad Gita explains, is the whole world has two purposes. One is to let me enact or act out my independent desires as an individual spiritual being, and ultimately to help me awaken to the fact that, it doesn't work here. And that's so much aligned with what I experienced the first 20 years of my life. It's so many people trying to sell me another bit of, what do you say, bill of goods, right? Get a big car, you'd be happy. Nope, didn't work. Have a swimming pool. I had an affluent family. Nope, didn't work. Go to parties. Didn't I? College story. Standing in a dormitory as a freshman, drinking a beer with some guys. And I said to this person I didn't know very well at all, maybe not at all, said, "This is a really crummy party." He said, "Yeah, you're right, it is. Did you go to the party last week? That one was really good." And I thought, okay, gosh, I missed it. Gita describes the mind as always hankering for something and lamenting for something you lost. So I thought, oh, I missed that party. A week or two later, standing in a party, bored out of my mind, mentioned to the person next to me, "Geez, this really isn't a good party. This is really boring." He said to me, "Yeah, it is. But did you go to the one 2 weeks ago?" It was like, "Yeah, I was there and it was boring too. Don't try to tell me that one was fun because I know it wasn't." Those simple kind of experiences just enforced my not enforced, reinforced, gave evidence to this whole paradigm that this Vaishnava perspective. So that's kind of like a layman's analysis of Vaishnava metaphysics. And then just to add to that, the idea that, and it's so easy. I mean, I'm amazed as a Krishna practitioner, as a practitioner of Bhakti, the idea that I can offer my food to God. We should be vegetarian because we're trying to minimize violence and all that. But I can offer my food to God, and by like a couple minutes of prayer, my food actually can become sanctified and purified, and actually it itself becomes spiritual nourishment. It just makes me think, what kind of person creates a system like that? What kind of person is God that creates a system like that? The idea I can decorate my house, like behind me, pictures of Krishna. We got pictures of Jesus in other parts of the house that can help reinforce my spiritual awakening, that I can listen to music that can uplift me spiritually. Kirtan, we love kirtan. I go to the National Basilica in Washington, D.C. every year if I'm in Washington on Christmas Eve. It's practically the only time I can get away. I love the music at midnight. It's just so uplifting because it's all wonderful, beautiful glorification of God. And, that I can spiritualize my family life and take vacations, but put God in this. Bhakti teaches this. Take vacations with your family, but spiritualize them. It's just the positiveness of the Vaishnav understanding that, yeah, there's suffering, but there's a purpose behind it, and it can help us make progress. And yeah, we're feeling lonely, but why are we feeling lonely? It's impetus for us to actually connect with Krishna, just the whole worldview, as opposed to like we're all in class warfare and we just have to get political power and then everybody be happy. Well, yeah, we tried that. They tried that in Russia and a lot of other states. You just give political power to a short number of people. Another band example, then maybe see if you have some comments, Jack. But I remember there was a group, maybe they're still around. The Who was big when I was in university. And they had one song. One of the lyrics was, "We won't get cheated again. We won't get fooled again." And one of the lines was, "You tear down the big boss, put in a new boss, won't get fooled again." It really resonated with me. The Democrats promise when we get in power, everything be hunky dory. Use a wonderful Michigan intellectually solid term, hunky dory. Um, this political party, that political party, this political system, that political system, make this much money, move from this house to that house, get rid of this car, get a new car, instead of going to the mountains, go to the beach. It all was just, hey, it's not working. It's not working. And coming in touch with a, spiritual process. And I certainly don't advocate, and I don't think any Vaishnava that understands our philosophy will advocate it is the exclusive or we have some kind of monopoly on the truth. I know you discussed that with Shona Karishi a few days ago. No, but that this positive vision is so much there. So those are just a few thoughts that I kind of find exciting. That's what excites me in life, to wake up in the morning and think, okay, I got a headache today. I got too much to do. I didn't get anything done off my list yesterday. My sister-in-law's here. They laugh all the time, about my questioning my productivity and my hyper activity, perhaps, whatever it is. But to be able to really think, when I look outside, I'm looking outside right now, my window, that there's a person behind creating the sun that wants to bring light, that there's a reason that these trees blossom every year, that there's a reason that the trees are standing there. And now the trees themselves are conscious beings, and they're gracing us with their gifts, and at the same time, in ways I don't understand, they are spiritual beings, none different from me, that are going through a process of spiritual evolution so that they can also one day awaken their love of God. I mean, it's like, wow, you guys really believe that? And that was my topic. Can the universe be that good? Vaishnavism says, yeah, it can be. It makes sense to me. And that's why I'm still here.
I love it. Well, let's send some love, gratitude to Anuttama Prabhu. Thank you for that wonderful share and the insights and just really laying it down, kind of going through that discernment process. It's super helpful. And we got hands coming up already. And if I just ask one question before we open it up, your role, you're the director of communications for ISKCON. And, clearly for those of us here watching, you get a sense that he has a gift of communication. And yet we all are in a space where we communicate, whether to our family, our children, or, whatever leadership roles we may have. How does, everything that you've learned and experienced and cultivated in this practice of bhakti, how does it inform your service? The many services you have as director of communications and just leadership of people. How do and then because we're thinking for ourselves, how can we, as we're discovering bhakti and becoming a little more humble, a little more tolerant, a little more respectful, how does this show up in your seva, in your work?
I think one way that shows up, we live in an era, there's a very suspicious of organizations and institutions. And, I'm an institutional organizational guy. I've been in an organization for so many years and representing that organization in some ways for 30, 40, almost 50 years. Um, and I think there's good reason for us to be suspicious. And I think there's good reason for us to be cautious. And I just gave a presentation at an international leadership sangha in our headquarters in Mayapur, West Bengal, challenging my fellow ISKCON members because we're growing. We're building big temples. We have expanding communities. We've been publishing millions of books for years. A lot of people are looking into bhakti in a serious way. Something that as an organization, the traditions, as you've been explaining, is thousands of years old, but as far as our particular organization, it's new. Are we ready to handle the pressures that come with, when you're a small, obscure group practicing bhakti, nobody really pays attention. But when you start having big temples and wealthy people contributing and inviting you to their weddings and so many things like that, temptation comes. And I think one of the reasons that I kind of moved away from the organized religious institutions I was exposed to was there was too much hypocrisy and there was too much lack of authenticity, which I know is a really big concept for young people today. So uh, a big part of how it informs me is in terms of our communicating internally. Let us not think we are, hopefully, like anyone of any religious practice, convinced of the depth and the benefit of our practice. But as soon as we get proud of it, and as soon as if we start thinking we're special, then that's the proof we're not special because it's not, like that, how you bow down, but what impact does it have in your life? It's not how you pray. What's the impact on your heart? It's not how you identify as a follower, as a Vaishnava, or as a Christian or Buddhist or Jew. Are you taking the teachings of Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad and Krishna into your heart? How are they affecting your life? There's a quote from Abraham Lincoln I like. I'm going to mess up. I don't have it memorized, but something to the effect of, I have little respect for a man's religion if his mule or his dog are not better because of it.
Mm.
So I think that's something, we can have these great esoteric, metaphysical understandings, but what does it mean down here? How do we live our lives? That's something that I learned, I think, early on from you mentioned the Vaishnava Christian dialogues. I think the very first one we had was outside of Boston. We rented a Catholic retreat center for the weekend, and we had about 20 scholars and practitioners, half Vaishnavas, half Christians. Professor Clooney was there, some other, Gordon Melton, who's a big scholar on new religious movements, and some other people. Larry Shin, who's a scholar, one of the first ones to study Krishna Bhakti in the West, and also a Christian minister, former president of couple universities in North America. And at one point, we're kind of going around the room. I had chosen the topic because I was one of the principal organizers. The topic was the kingdom of God. And in part because I was thinking this Vaishnavas can shine on this, you know. We can talk about what Krishna does and his mother and his father and you know, rasa relationship between God and the soul and how God, although he's infinite, he accepts an infinitesimal spiritual spark to play the role of his mother because he relishes that loving relationship and that mood is that, you know, there's a lot to talk about. And when we went around the room at one point, I remember Larry Shin, who's become a very dear friend, um, he mentioned, he said, well, you know, as a Christian, my tradition doesn't really talk that much about the kingdom of God. It's there, but not that much. What really matters to us is how we're living our life as Christians and as people in this world. And I think I felt myself physically shrinking into the couch because I realized, okay, we have a lot of good stuff theologically, philosophically, so many revelations that, you know, we believe according to our tradition. But are we practicing it well? And here was a tradition, an organization he represented. He was United Methodist, I believe, been around at least for 50, you know, 5 times longer than my organization had at that point. And I realized, okay, great, you might have big philosophy. Are you living it properly? Are you actually, how is it affecting your life today? And that's something I've seen in our Vaishnava Christian dialogues over the years. Um, we need to learn from each other. We really need to learn from each other because there's certain things that we're strong on in a sense that we can really contribute. And there's a lot of things we even if we're strong, we can still learn more. But there's a lot of areas that we need to learn a lot more. So
Beautiful. I love that. That just a great question all of us can ask ourselves. How are we living it? You know, we engage the Gita, the Bhagavatam, these great texts, whatever text we're engaging, but how are we actually practically applying it? Beautiful response. We got questions in the chat, hands up, but I guess we'll come to the virtual hands first. Sarah George over in Kent, UK. Welcome.
Hey, Krishna.
Hi, thanks for talk. I guess listening to your story, it really resonated with us because we've kind of come around to Bhakti after a lot of suffering. You know, we've done the whole material thing, we've done the money thing, we've done brand names and trying to, you know, really strive throughout our lives. And again, we have learned over the years that it is not what provides happiness, and we've obviously been searching around for what provides happiness and we've ended up here, so yay, fantastic. And it seems that that's a lot of people's stories as well. I mean, some people come in other ways, but it seems to be a lot of people coming through just the disgust of society and what it's trying to make us believe. And so here we are. Is there another way? Because we've got kids and they're like 14 and 15 right now, and we're obviously trying to shape them into sensible human beings. We're not pushing any of this on them at all. We're trying to live it ourselves. But do they have to go out there into the world and go through this process in order to come back? Or, you know, I mean, how can we help them? Is it no point in us trying to
that's a great
mitigate any of this?
great question. I'm thinking in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes as 4 different types of people that come to him. One is one who's in distress, one who's in need of money, I believe one who's just inquisitive, and then one who's particularly wise, if I remember the 4 categories right. So I think it's a mixture of all of those. And it may be that for some people, like maybe the two of you and me, there had to be a little more suffering to kind of wake us up. Uh,
Few more
you know,
punches in the face.
yeah, humor in the face, you know. Um, I'll tell one more story again. My undergraduate years were like my last years as a student. So really, I remember walking through a park when I quit that one university, went to another one, walking through some big park by myself in the fall and thinking and seeing couples off in the distance and thinking, boy, if I just had a girlfriend, which I'd left behind, then I'd be happy. Okay. Flash forward, short story version. Springtime, walking, holding hands with my girlfriend 6 months later, literally thinking, watching a couple guys throwing the football, my mind saying, if I could only get rid of this girlfriend, this relationship is causing me so much pain. And I suddenly remembered the last time I was in that park, I hadn't been there. The last time I was in that park was like in the fall, wishing I had what I have now. And now I'm wishing to get rid of what I have. And it's like, what kind of crazy illusion is this that we're suffering under? So I think it's a mixture. Some people maybe not so much suffering, it's just they're wiser. They're brought up as your kids are in a more pious family where they're exposed to spirituality and spiritual practice, and maybe they see the suffering around them and they don't need to undergo it themselves. But ultimately, we know we're all individuals, and our mothers and our fathers and our best friends can give us the best opportunity, but it's up to us how we act on it.
Yeah.
I know my son many times has said publicly the only reason he's a devotee of God is because of his mother's prayers.
Right.
So I think as
I'll
mothers and
start that
fathers,
then.
yes, yes. In addition to good instructions, good example, and a lot of prayers.
Okay.
Right.
Fabulous.
Excellent.
And
That's a plan.
patience and patience.
Mm,
And keep in mind that your son or daughter, they're going to follow their own path and it's going to be different from yours.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope it's different from ours, but we can't control that.
Same, but it's interesting. I mean, like you say, I'm in the same boat as the three of you, and we go through a lot of adversity. It seems to be a common, and but I guess like attracts like, and that's maybe what brought us together here. And now we're desperately seeking, something greater. So beautiful question, very relevant. Let's send some love and appreciation, Sarah and George,
Hare Krishna.
Kent UK, Hare Krishna. We've got that actually handled pretty well the question that was in the chat. But Sonal, are you able to come on video so that we can spotlight you to ask a question? There you are. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for that. My question is, so the purpose of life is to develop a relationship with Krishna, God, a loving
Reawaken,
relationship,
reawaken
reawaken. Okay.
relation.
Okay, reawaken our relationship with God. So my question is multifaceted. So one would be, God is unknowable, Krishna is unknowable until he gives us that grace to know him, right? That's what it says in Bhagavad Gita. So now, how do you love someone who you don't know, who you've never met? And you can say, okay, well, you read about him, you read his pastimes, and then it's, okay, well, it's easy to love someone who's all attractive and who does all these mischievous, cute things and who's so loving and who's so accepting. And then you come to, okay, that's easy. Now, what about the purpose of material relationships in this material world with other beings as me, who's just a spark, a divine spark? And then the question becomes, what is the purpose of those relationships? And do we just, obviously, we don't just discard them and focus on just the relationship with Krishna, but we put Krishna as the center between these relationships. And so my question is, what do the scriptures say? What do you think about the purpose of material relationships? And I always see it as kind of a training ground for developing true love, unconditional love. It's harder to love another person than it is to love a perfect being. So maybe it's just a training ground for cultivating that kind of love. Or maybe that's too grand a goal, and maybe that's just like silly to think that I can do that. So any thoughts on that would be great.
I think you're answering a lot of your own questions. And it's really wonderful to see the process of analysis that's going on. I would just offer maybe one distinction. It's not spiritual relationships, mature relationships. In other words, like your relationship with your mother, with your father, with your husband, with your kids, with your best friend. You can spiritualize it or you can make it more materialistic. And materialistic, I'm going to be a little harsh here, but let's say at the extreme is exploitative. Okay, if materialistic in the sense of like it's all about me and it's all about you, and we come together because we can mutually kind of be happy together for a while, and then we split up. But we can spiritualize, or we can purify, or we can make less selfish, more selfless, whatever the relationship. We can spiritualize our relationship with our mother, even if she's not a devotee of God. We can spiritualize our relation with our friends. We can spiritualize our relationships with strangers just by the way we interact with them. So I think it's not a question of like, what's the goal of what's the purpose of material relationships? I would say the purpose of material relationships is a dead end because it means it's all about exploitation on that end of the extreme. But any relationship in this material world is not a dead end because it's an expression of our need for interactions. Vaishnava philosophy teaches we are persons. We need interactions with other people. And even, in the ideal spiritual realm, Goloka Vrindavan, God's there, but there's other devotees there too. It's not like there's this big void. So we always have relationships. How can we spiritualize those relationships? How can I not only, like I mentioned, the family with the friends. How do we spiritualize family? Well, every family eats together. We can eat sanctified foods rather than foods that aren't good for our spiritual or physical bodies. We can spiritualize our vacation time. We can spiritualize the decorations in our home. So whatever relationships we have, we can help direct them a little bit more towards God. Even as a business person, spiritualize your business. Okay, at least, act in a pious way. Don't be a business who thinks, the customer's there today to be exploited, but start thinking about what's the long-term effect of this relationship. I want to sell you, a used car that is going to run well and that's going to help you. It's going to fulfill your needs for a fair price. You can be a spiritual used car salesman. We need to change our motivation. We need to purify our motivation. You know, we can be a lawyer. So you decide you're not going to work for the biggest, most exploitative firm in the world. Maybe you decide you're going to work for some firm that's actually helping the world. And at the very least, the techniques that you use in your law firm, you're not going to stick a knife in the back of everybody whenever you get a chance. You're going to be an ethical, honest, strong-willed, but pious person as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a taxi driver. And I really believe that's one thing that really excites me about Vaishnav ideas is that we can spiritualize this world. If you could trust every auto repair guy, because in his heart he's thinking he's doing it for God, or at least some auto repair people, how the world would be different. You didn't have to worry about somebody, what chemical do they put in the product? Well, they didn't put that chemical because they knew that long term, maybe it would give them more profits, but it's bad for people. It's bad for the environment. So they make a different choice on that. I think it's all about spiritualizing those choices, spiritualizing those relationships as best possible.
Beautiful. What's the big question? And you really got to some gold there with the response. Thank you, Sanal. Will you let us know where you're calling in from?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Well, we're sending our love, appreciation, gratitude to you in New Jersey.
Thank you.
Beautiful question. Thank you for being here with us. And Anuttama, we just have a moment left. Thank you so much for taking the time. We got super positive feedback in the chat, and I'm sure many people will love the recording. If you were to leave us with parting words, for us, newer, you've been doing this 50 years, some of us, just getting started. What would you offer us as we continue to fumble our way through this material world?
Well, I mentioned about spiritualizing, the art in our home. So I'll show you them to read. This is just a small excerpt from my teacher, Srila Prabhupada, that I have up on my wall in my room that I look at when I'm having a bad day or when I'm having a good day to help me remember. It's a beautiful quote. I feel very beautiful. He says, when we become convinced that Krishna or God is our intimate friend and protector, how happy and peaceful we will be. Just be in love with Krishna. Then you'll see how much tranquility you will feel, how you are protected by Krishna, how you avoid insufficiency, how you become pure, and how you make progress in spiritual life. Thank you very much. That was the end of his lecture. And I just find that, again, could the world be this good? That actually, no matter what I did yesterday, Krishna's given me another chance. No matter whatever pain there is, whatever difficulty I'm going through, I can learn from it. I can learn to be a better person. I can actually help uplift people in some small way every day in whatever capacity I have. It's a beautiful perspective on life.
Wow, that is what a beautiful quote to finish with, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for your presence, your wisdom. Happy 70th. We're sending our love and appreciation to you on this, milestone and many more
It was a
decades
few
to come.
months ago. It
Okay.
was a few months ago, but I'll take the hearts. I need all the hearts I can get.
Huge congratulations. Thank you so much, Prabhu. And friends, thank you for being here. We've got more sessions coming up over the weekend. And until we meet again, wishing you an amazing rest of the day. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Anuttama.
Krishna.
Shanti, Anuttama.
Hare Krishna.